Welcome to Zestful Aging, where I interview inspiring, fascinating women who are navigating aging with class and sass. I'm your host, Nicole Christina. Hey everyone, I am so grateful for all of the downloads, and I'd love a rating on iTunes and a comment. And please subscribe. It helps the show's rating so other people can find it and learn how to age well. And if you are loving the podcast, why not check out the companion online course, Zestful Aging, Simple and Sustainable Habits for Health and Longevity. You can access it through my website, NicoleChristina.com/Zestful Aging. It's based on the Harvard study of adult development, and I'm really proud of how it's turned out. Well, I've got my coffee in my hand and my trusty dog Sparky beside me, so let's begin. Today we have a fellow presenter at the upcoming International Federation of Aging Conference in Toronto. Helen is a professor at the University of Central Lancashire in the UK. Her research is focused on human rights for prisoners and their families. She's also interested in gender and in international perspectives on criminal justice. Her work has been cited in argument by counsel before the Grand Chamber of the European Court of Human Rights, and she has contributed to a number of significant reports on prisoners' families. She's passionate about faith, justice, crime, good food, and travel. Hello, Helen.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm really good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm excited to be talking to you today. And I guess, you've probably heard this question many times, but I am curious, how did you get interested in the judicial system and prisoners' rights?
A really good question, and I haven't got an obvious answer to that. When I was young, when I was a kid, when I was little, I always wanted to write. I always wanted to write novels. But I'm the first out of my family to go to university, and there was a certain amount of pressure in my family that I should do something at university that would get me a job, not just because I wanted to study English. And I'd always been kind of interested in crime and justice and law. And looking back, a lot of the books I loved when I was a child had prison as a theme. There's E. Nesbitt, The Railway Children is about 3 children whose father goes to jail for something he didn't do, and so on and so on. And I wish there was an easy answer to that, but I don't know what got me interested, but I do know that I went off to study law at university in Aberystwyth in 1987. And in the UK, law is an undergraduate subject, so you can do a law degree as your undergraduate, which you can't in the US.
Yeah.
And I went off to Aberystwyth to study law with a vague idea I was going to become a lawyer. And I did a couple of students and placements in the holidays and things and vacations, and realised I hated a lot of the paperwork in lawyers' offices, and it was quite boring. And then in my second year, end of my first year, beginning of my second year, I was kind of home for the holidays, and my parents were pushing me to, I suppose, do some more work, think about working for the next year and so on academic things. And I picked up a book in the library called Criminal Women, which was written by a woman called Pat Carlin, who I now know is one of the most famous feminist criminologists in the world. And this was a 6 biographical accounts of women in prison. And from that moment, my life completely became obsessed with women in prison, because I did a course called Criminal Justice, and this is in 1988. And it was a whole kind of semester course called Criminal Justice. And I loved the module, but it had no women in it. All the way through, we talked about police, we talked about courts, we talked about prisons. There were no women. And so in my third year, I had to do a dissertation, and because of this, I kind of went to my tutor and said, look, I want to do something on women in prison. And he kind of looked at me and went, women? Prison? It was really funny. And I remember,
interesting concept.
Yeah, and I kind of stood there going, yeah, about 5% of them are women, in Britain. And he kind of went, oh. And he's a really, I'm still in touch with him. He's a lovely, lovely man. He's just about retiring as a professor. And I just remember standing in his office going, yeah, women in prison. He went, oh. Yeah, obviously there are some, but he didn't actually know anything about it. And so I started working on this 8,000 word dissertation, and I will never forget I was standing in the university corridor one day, and he walked up to me and he said, "Oh, how's the research going?" And I thought, "The what?" And he was the first person to ever call what I did research. And I thought, "Oh." So I wrote this thing anyway and got my degree. And I was going to go off and still be a lawyer, but I didn't have any money behind me. I didn't have the family connections. I didn't have any of that. And what happened then was that the university had a symposium. And that year's symposium was, I think it was about women and law. And I discovered that another famous feminist professor, a woman called Alison Morris, had been invited to speak at this. So I went up to this same tutor and I said, "Look, can I meet her?" And he said, "Look, she's really busy. She's really famous. You've got no chance." And I kind of went, "Well, please." So basically, he kind of said to me, and I can remember it was a coffee break. He said, "Well, stand there, literally next to a table, and I'll see what I can do." So anyway, next thing, and I'm a third year student. I've got no confidence, whatever. And suddenly, this woman walks up to me, and I was completely starstruck, and I just kind of went, "I really love your book." And then she just said, "Well, have you considered going to Cambridge for a master's?" And I kind of went, "No, I'm the first time my family to go to college, And she basically said I should apply to Cambridge University, which, as you know, is one of the greatest universities in Britain.
Of course.
To do a master's. And I was so stunned. And then, long story, I had a boyfriend at the time who didn't believe I'd ever get in and all kinds of things. And so basically, I pretty much sent the forms off to prove him wrong. And next thing, 3 or 4 months later, I found myself in the position of having an offer to go to Cambridge to study criminology, which I desperately wanted to do, but with absolutely no money. So to cut long story short, I got my degree, I borrowed the money to go, and off I went to Cambridge University for a year to study criminology as a master's, and it was amazing. And it's the oldest criminology institute in the world, so it was great. The people we got to meet, the people we got to talk to, it was fantastic. And at that time then, there was a lot of work coming about women in prison, and I can remember suddenly thinking, well, all this is about young women, what about older women? And that kind of, then when I left out, I had to get a job, and that's how it happened. So it doesn't make a great deal of sense as a kind of narrative of, well, this happened and this happened and this happened. But it's always been something that is there, and I come back to it. And so most of what I do at the moment now is about women, and it is about prisons. And then it always kind of goes in a circle. So I kind of do a bit on families, and then maybe I go and do a bit about aging, but then I come back and do a bit more about prison. And then I've done things on victims as well, but it always kind of takes me back to the prison. Yeah, and I haven't got an obvious answer as to why.
Do you think there's any, you talked about being what we call a first generation, college person, academic. Is there any sense of, I know what it feels like to be an underdog and not having as many chances as others more privileged?
I mentioned you picked up that faith. I've been a Christian since 3 days before my 16th birthday, and that's driven me quite a lot. I wouldn't say underdog. My parents have been fantastic in many, many ways. My father he's 76 in a couple of days, and he's worked really hard all his life. He left school at 15 with no qualifications, worked his way up, and they were very much into education. But I think looking back, I do have that sense of, it certainly wasn't easy for me, and I certainly didn't have those privileges. At school, I was bullied at school. I was picked on because I was clever, I was thin, I was nerdy, but before it was cool to be a nerd, and I did get bullied all the way through school. And I do think there's that sense, thinking about it, I think there is that sense of injustice and wrongness that's always driven me. Always. I look back now and think the stuff I get angry about, and my 14-year-old daughter is fortunately just the same, I'm quite proud of her. The stuff I get that really gets me going is stuff that I think is unfair or unjust. And, I get very angry about poverty and racism and LGBTQI issues and all this kind of thing. And I think it is that sense of it being unfair. I suppose because when I was bullied at school, I didn't think that was fair. And also things to do with authority. I don't think, systems back in the 80s were very good at protecting people. But so I wish there was a nice, easy answer. People always ask me, was my father in jail? And the answer is, well, no. But if you look back, I've done my family history. If you look back 50 years, 80 years, 100 years, I've got family members who died in the workhouses in this country because they were poor.
It's like the Charles Dickens kind of story, where the debtor's prison. And, yeah. Do you think, as part of your faith, there's that sense that there, but for the grace of God, go I?
Yeah, I think I've always said that.
Mm-hmm.
When I used to volunteer in homelessness and drug rehab, I've always done quite a lot of volunteering, and I used to volunteer in homelessness and drug rehab, and I remember doing that stuff and realizing that some of these people, could have been my friends, could have been me, if I'd made different choices. And I'm often very aware that, my great grandmother died of tuberculosis at the age of 28, in,
Mm.
very poor. And my mum and dad didn't have any money starting out. They came from very, very poor backgrounds. So, yeah, I do have that kind of sense of, I suppose it could have been me.
Is there a difference in terms of how our cultures view prisoners, do you think, in terms of the US and the UK? Is there sort of a different ethos, like this is the
That's
criminal
such a good
justice system?
question. One of the really odd things about Britain is, I think from a US perspective, there's a tendency to think Britain's in Europe. If you see what I mean, people talk about coming to
Mm-hmm.
Europe, and yeah. And in many ways, of course, Britain is in Europe, although many British people are trying to get out of Europe as much as they can at the moment with the EU. But actually, in legal terms, Britain is not close to Europe. We're almost like, I always joke, we're like a state that's out in the sea somewhere off New Jersey. And there's a great book by, I think it's Whitman, where he compares the history of American criminal justice with the history of what he calls European criminal justice. And he lumps together France, Germany, and the UK as penal systems that have got different foundations. And he talks about the American experience of slavery and contrasts it with the European experience of revolutions and so on. But there's a fundamental flaw in that book, because he links together the UK with France and Germany.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, in the way we deal with prisoners and our prison system, we are much more like the US. We don't have the death penalty at all in the UK. We haven't had the death penalty for murder since 1965. And so we're not like the US in that sense. But then we are like the states that don't have it, if that makes sense. But over the last 30 years, we have followed the US a very great deal in penal policy, and more than the rest of Europe. So, for example, our prison population is increasing. The number of women in prison has trebled. It's just going down now, but it had trebled over 20 years. We're imprisoning more people for longer.
Mm-hmm.
And we imprison more people for longer than anywhere else in Europe, including Turkey. So we're actually a very high imprisoning country in the European context. Now, we're not imprisoning as many people as the US, but we're very
is.
No, nobody is. But we're very much up there. And when we talk about the mass imprisonment epidemic, we talk about the US, we talk about the UK, we talk about Australia, and this epidemic of mass imprisonment. So, to some extent, to think about there being differences between the UK and the US, there are differences, but actually the UK experience is far closer to the US experience. Now, there are some things we don't really have in the same way. We do have gang culture and we have organised crime, but it's not as extensive as in the US. And so our prisons are not so divided on gang lines as many US prisons. We have race issues, but our race issues are different to US race issues.
Mm-hmm.
But we still have overrepresentation of Black and Asian people in our prisons. And young Black men in this country are more likely to go to jail than university, like in the US. So we have those kinds of things. I mean, our gun culture is very different to the US.
Mm-hmm.
And, our prison guards don't carry guns. Because our police, on the whole, they don't carry guns. They can carry guns, but it's much more controlled. We're not a gun culture, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So there's all kinds of similarities. I mean, the weird thing that kind of I think Americans don't realise is how much we take stuff from US penal policy. So things like Megan's Law on sex offenders that you had, we have that. And it became Sarah's Law after a little girl called Sarah Payne who was murdered by a convicted sex offender. And so we adopted a kind of version of Megan's Law. We have a version of 3 strikes and you're out, which we got from you. We have electronic tagging, which we got from you, and of course you got from Spider-Man cartoons. No, really. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Well, I can't remember the name of the judge, but in the 70s, I think, maybe early 80s. And I have to go and check this. I should have checked it. There was a judge, and he was a comic book fanatic. And there was an episode, there's a strip cartoon in one of the comic books where the Green Goblin puts a kind of radio transmitter on Spider-Man so he can track where he is. And basically this judge was a comic book obsessive and thought, that's a really good idea, and got together with a friend of his who made locks and burglar alarms, and they made a prototype. Oh. And basically then they sold this, and it is what we now have as electronic tagging.
But I have to tell you, I just interviewed a woman named Kat Schuler, and her husband was one of the main people at Marvel Comics.
Oh, wow.
And she's still he died young, and she still goes and talks to children about Marvel Comics and Captain America.
Oh, my daughter's a Marvel obsessive. She would love that.
Well, I'll have to give you the contact information after our conversation.
Absolutely. But no, American stuff, I mean, it's interesting in criminal justice terms, because when I go to US conferences and world conferences, we take a lot, in Britain, we take a lot from the US in terms of criminal justice. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't kind of go back the other way. But we don't look so much at Europe. We don't look at the Scandinavian countries anything like as much in a sense as we should, where they're very low imprisoning countries. I mean, if you go to Germany and the Netherlands, an 18-month prison sentence there is a long sentence.
Is that work better in terms of your study? Is that, I mean, I know this is a big question and it's a loaded question, but is that a more successful model?
I think it is. I genuinely think it is. I think the disadvantages and the disbenefits of long prison sentences kind of outweigh the benefits. I mean, there is an argument, obviously, around public protection. There are a small number of people who pose such an extreme danger that maybe they need to be somewhere away from everybody else. Mm-hmm. But, the Norwegians have just dealt with this in the Anders Breivik case. You might know about Breivik. He's the one who massacred many, many young people. And he is effectively, because he's so dangerous, he's basically a neo-Nazi, and he's not going to change his view. Mm-hmm. They want to keep, obviously, everybody else safe, but he's on an island, and he has a huge amount of freedom on that island. But he just can't leave the island. But the Norwegians are very much, that's their approach to it. And many of these countries, they're much more rehabilitation-minded as well than we are. We have become very, very punitive, like the US. Mm-hmm. We've got the war on drugs. We borrowed the same language. We've got pretty much all those same kind of initiatives you've got on a small island. Mm-hmm. We've gone very much the same way in terms of things like longer prison sentences, like 3 strikes and you're out, and so on and so on and so on. So we are very, very different, particularly places like Germany, the Netherlands, and certainly the Scandinavian countries. I mean, the Scandinavian countries use fines and community penalties far more. They imprison far less. Mm-hmm. And I think it's far less damaging because it doesn't rip families apart in the same way that mass imprisonment does.
Would you talk a little bit about, I know that, one of the things that you focus on is what happens to the families, what happens to the children. Would you talk a little bit about that? Because I think our listeners would like to know more about that.
Okay. And when I'm talking now, I'll talk about the UK and I'll talk about the US, because a lot of the research on prisoners' families is UK, US, Australia, New Zealand. Until about 10 years ago, it was commonplace to say that prisoners' families are invisible victims. We'd always use the phrase invisible victims or hidden victims. Mm-hmm. There wasn't that much research on prisoners' families. And in the last 10 years, there's been this huge explosion of interest. So for the listener's point of view, there's loads and loads and loads of things they can read. And of course, I could say, read my book, or read my books. I've got 2 books, you can get them on Amazon. But there's a huge amount of work you can read. And the first thing to say is that for some families, having somebody sent to jail or to prison is the best thing that can happen to them. If you've got a mom or dad or say teenage son or daughter in the family, particularly if they're involved in gang crime, they're using drugs, they've got the kind of street life coming into the house, then or if you've got parents with substance abuse and addictions where the money is all being spent on that, then suddenly having that person away from the home can be the best thing. Equally, if you've got a violent parent, if you've got dad who's always, attacking mom and attacking the kids, then having that parent, or you've got sexual abuse, then having that parent out of the house can be the best thing. But those benefits are almost always accompanied by other negative things. So obvious things in a family. If you've got a father who goes to jail, pop goes to jail, then if you've got a traditional family where dad goes out to work, father goes out to work, and mom stays home, then you lose the income. You lose the father's income. And it's quite important as well that a criminal income is still an income. So if the male in the family is a drug dealer, but he's bringing money in, I know some of you listeners will hate me for saying this. It's not that I'm arguing in favour of drug dealing, but if he is the main income earner for the family, then that income is lost. So your first major consequence is if the main earner, who is very often the male, goes to prison, there's a loss of an income. Now, there can also be other very practical consequences, because if you lose that income, then maybe the family can't afford to pay rent if they're renting property, or they can't pay a mortgage on a house. And so the first consequence can be a very basic financial consequence. The family can just end up in poverty because that income is lost. The UK is slightly different to the US because we have a different benefit system, but our benefit system has undergone massive cuts recently as well. So it's not as comfortable, but it's not as supportive as it used to be. But the first big consequence is very often loss of an income, which can then trickle into things like loss of accommodation. Prisoners' children then become very likely to move caregivers and actually move houses. And so many of them, I think the main figure is they move something like 5 times in the year following their father's imprisonment.
Oh my goodness.
And so you've got a basic financial thing about not paying rent or mortgage or those costs, which can have knock-on effects on the money in the family. You've also got the emotional impact. You've got the shock for the partners, but you've also got the shock for the kids. And very often it's experienced as like a bereavement, because they're just not there anymore. And one of the biggest problems for the children is prisoners' parents don't know how to explain to the children where the other parent has gone.
Oh, how interesting.
So in the UK, we often say that 1/3 of prisoners' children get told the truth, 1/3 get lied to, and 1/3 don't get told anything at all. And I'm not entirely sure what the US lies are, the classic lies. But in Britain, back in the 1970s when I was growing up, if your dad was in jail, it was common to say he was working away in the oil rigs in Scotland, because there were oil rigs in Scotland.
I see.
And in Germany, they say, oh, he's working in Poland.
I see. I wonder what they say in the US.
I don't know. I don't know, unless you just say they're working out of state. You get them saying things like they're working for the government. I had a student once who I interviewed because her husband was in jail, and she told her little girl that daddy was away working as a smurf.
Oh!
Because he had a blue and white uniform.
Oh my goodness. And so there's this whole shame.
Oh, God, yeah.
And I imagine that, what's better, being told dad is a smurf or your dad is in prison, and then you have to take that. And I know that in the US, people find out because their classmates read it in the newspaper.
Oh, absolutely. And then what happens is, of course, the other thing is it's difficult for parents sometimes. If dad's a sex offender, then there's a big problem. How do you tell the children that's what dad's done? Particularly if he's offended against children. There are some great guidebooks, and I know there's some US books as well, on telling parents how to tell the children. And some of the support groups can help parents tell their children. There's a lot of advice. I mean, if anybody's listening to this who's affected by this, there's some great advice out there on how to tell the kids. And all the evidence is that if parents are open with the children and tell them things in an age-appropriate way, that's the best thing for the kids. Because what happens is the kids blame themselves. They think, oh God, I said something. Why is my daddy or my mom gone away? they blame themselves. And yeah, they do get told by the classmates. Sometimes they'll get told because it's in the papers. Sometimes because other kids' parents will say, don't play with that child, his dad's a drug dealer.
So there's this shame on top of the grief and the loss. And so then you have some real sort of mental health issues.
And the other thing with the
to
kids, just to come back to this, the thing with the kids, is if you get parents who lie to the children, now, kids can read sometimes when they're very young. So the parents will be taking the child to visit, but without telling the child it's a prison. So they'll say, oh, daddy's going working for the government in a secret place. But the kids aren't stupid. They'll look at it and go, HMP, Her Majesty's Prison. And then the kids go, oh my God, dad's in jail and mum doesn't know.
Oh my goodness.
So the kids are looking around thinking, does mum not know he's in a prison? Because the kids will say, oh, he's a spy or he's working for the government or something. So the kids are then going, I know, does my mum not know?
One of the problems we have in the States is that, and I'm not an expert in this. This is just a little bit of that I know, is people have to travel very long distances.
We have a small version of that. We have a tiny, we have a small version of that, and that's particularly an issue. I'm going to talk about stigma in a minute, but we have a very particular issue with women's prisons because we have so few women's prisons. And the big women's prison in London, and this is a good thing, it's closed. But it has created a problem that women are held a lot further away from their families. So we have a smaller version of that.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to Bedford Hills Women's Prison, the New York Women's Prison, and I've talked to the people there that do the projects in New York with the kids coming up from New York City up to the prison, and the riding the bus stuff, and I've talked to those people. But yeah, I mean, we have a small version of that. And it is a long way relative, and there's very little public transport. But to go back to your point about stigma, I think the stigma thing is one of the worst things because prisoners' partners, family members, they blame themselves and the newspapers blame them. The blame is always put on women rather than men. There's always a kind of assumption that a prisoner's wife must have known. That's the phrase, she must have known and must have benefited. And very often they don't. But it's not just actual stigma. I mean, I've interviewed many, many prisoners' partners, prisoners' family members, and they are sometimes victims of physical assaults. They're victims of criminal damage. They're victims of threats and so on. But the other big thing is fear. And many of them are terrified of that stigmatization, even if it doesn't really exist. And so the mental health issues, you've got things like anxiety, you have depression, which are real issues. And for the kids, particularly teenagers, the girls very often develop eating disorders, behavioural issues and all these kind of things. So the mental health issues are huge. But the other thing is the stigma. Even when their communities are quite friendly, they're always terrified of that stigma. So, for example, way back in 1996, when I first started working on prisoners' families, I went to a weekend conference held by a charity, which in Britain existed for the families of very serious offenders. And I was very honoured to be invited to this. They said, well, come and spend the weekend with us, with our family members, and just listen and whatever. And I knew that some of their family members were family members of very famous, particularly murderers in Britain. And you may or may not know about the case of James Bolger, who was a 2-year-old who was killed by 2 10-year-olds in Liverpool back in the early 90s. And I knew from the newspaper reporting that the mother of one of these child murderers went to this group. And I got there, I got to this room, and it was the welcome night, and we all had name badges on, and we were introducing ourselves and so on, And I knew there were people in that room whose family members were really famous murderers. But I didn't recognise a single surname. And I didn't realise till the following morning, when somebody was talking to me, they'd all changed their names because they were terrified of being recognised as having that person in their family. So the women had gone back to their unmarried names. Some of them had invented names. They call themselves Smith rather than something unusual. They had all changed their names, one way or another, so that they weren't infamous.
How was it to be in that space with, I'm just trying to imagine what that experience is like as a parent. I mean, how was that for you?
Well, I wasn't a parent then and I was very young, but the thing is, from their point of view, is when people feel that stigmatised, loneliness is a massive thing as well. I mean, Britain is like the US, in some communities, people are very open about having family members in prison. But in other communities, people aren't. And so many prisoners' partners in particular feel very, very lonely. And they don't tell anybody where their husband or boyfriend or child or even parent is.
It's like the leprosy
Oh,
of the
absolutely.
21st century.
And I've taught students where I've got one at the moment whose father's in jail, but she hasn't told anybody else in her class group. But she's told me. And I've taught many students over the years who have family members in jail, but nobody else knows. But from their point of view, in that room, suddenly that's a space where they're all equal and they can talk. And the way that charity organised itself was that they had monthly get-togethers where they called them lunches, and they all brought food and they talked and they offered support to each other in a non-judgmental way. And that was the most important thing, because there were women in that room whose partners and children had committed sometimes really awful crimes. I mean, really awful crimes. And they had nowhere else they could be honest. And I'm quite interested, actually, in the way in which social media and the internet are helping this. And I haven't done the research yet, but I'm hoping to, which is there are some wonderful websites now, but also things like Facebook pages. And again, this might be useful for listeners, where there are Facebook pages for prisoners' wives, prisoners' partners, prisoners' parents. And I think the internet can offer people a way of feeling less isolated, because they can connect without actually telling anybody near where they are. I mean, I interviewed a woman about, how long ago? Again, about a while ago. And she outwardly was quite wealthy woman a while ago. I interviewed a woman, and it turned out her two sons had been professional bank robbers. And they had basically robbed banks together for a long time until they got caught. And she worked in a university. She worked in administration in a university. And for 14 years, her office mates never knew that every weekend she was going to see one or the other in high security prisons. And one of the high security prisons is on the Isle of Wight, which isn't quite like Alcatraz, but it is on an island. And she would have to go there from London, a good couple of hours drive on a boat trip, every fortnight to see her son. And she didn't tell anybody.
A secret life.
And there's a lot of it about, and there's a lot of, when you start talking, there's a lot of it about, but people still are not very open about it.
Are you finding that your research is more welcome now that we have such mass incarceration? Are people more interested in it, or less because it's becoming perhaps more punitive, so they're not so interested in a more compassionate view?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. That is such a difficult question. It's a brilliant question. In Britain, we have the Daily Mail, which is a very conservative newspaper, and it's not like Fox News, but it's edging that way. It's the closest you would get. You know what I mean? But it's kind of the voice of kind of Middle England. It's very traditional, white, middle class, conservative. Yeah. And the readers of the Daily Mail actually hate me. The work I did in the European Court of Human Rights, they actually hate me for, though they don't know it's me they hate, because luckily the journalist didn't name me. He just lampooned my work horribly. But yeah, it's a really good question, because what you find is some communities, therefore, prison isn't an equal impact employer, an equal opportunity employer. Prison affects the poor. It affects the most socially excluded people in society. I mean, prisoners' kids, this isn't usually the only problem they've got to cope with. They're probably already poor. They're already not doing brilliantly well at school. They've already got family problems. Many of them have already experienced bereavement, ill health amongst parents and everything. So prisoners' kids have already got loads of problems. So prison, and the mass imprisonment epidemic in particular, targets the poorest and the most dispossessed and the most excluded in our society anyway, and certainly in the US. Mass imprisonment is particularly targeting African American, Black, Latin.
And we have people who are in prison just waiting to be sentenced.
Well, so do we.
Okay.
We have remand as well. But what's happening, it's a really good question, which is that in some ways there's a lot more interest. And if you look at the UK government, they've had several reports that says a supportive family can really stop people reoffending. So the Farmer report that came out last year by Lord Farmer, talks about prisoners' families being the golden thread that run through the whole of the prison system. And they can be really important in helping prisoners during the sentence and actually and then stopping them reoffending when they get out. So you've got that side of it. But then the flip side is that real punitive attitude that says, well, these people are criminals, they've offended. Why should they see their families? We should kind of, lock them up on bread and water and chains and not do anything like that. And my argument about that...
Us and them.
But my argument about that is always, well, even if that's your view of prisoners, it's not my view, but it can be somebody else's view, the kids don't deserve to suffer. So when I talk about prisoners' families, if I get somebody who always asks the question, well, why do you care about these people? They're evil criminals. I will say, yeah, but it's not the kids' fault. And I always talk about prisoners' children. I mean, I firmly believe in human rights for prisoners and equality and all those, because it matters. I think, obviously prisoners are people and deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. But for those people that are the other way, the extreme right wing, I will always say, yeah, what about the kids? They haven't done anything wrong.
Mm-hmm. And how is that received?
Usually quite well, actually, because people don't realise how much prisoners' children suffer. Mm-hmm. It's when you start giving examples. And the other thing, and it's like the US as well, is visits vary massively between prisons. And so some prisons are fabulously welcoming to families, and they have all kinds of family projects and family days where the kids can go in and be with their parents, and it's quite relaxed. I mean, the big thing we don't have that you have in some states is we don't have conjugal visits. Mm-hmm. We do not have conjugal visiting. So we, like in some US states, you can go and spend time overnight with your prisoner. You can't do that in the UK, mostly. Mm-hmm. But some prisons are fabulously welcoming. There's a prison in Wales which keeps winning awards for being so family friendly, and it's great. But other prisons are big, old, scary places which are really quite unwelcoming to families. And there's massive variation. So some prisons are great for kids, and others are just and visitors, and some are just awful. And it's very frightening.
Trauma on top of trauma. I wonder what it's like for you living in a world that looks like it's going in a direction right now anyway, very opposite from recognizing humanity.
I'm laughing because I despair. The wonderful thing, I suppose, is that my daughter's 14. I love my daughter. She's the only child I've got. And I think because of me being a mom, I've always been very open with her about what I do. Mm-hmm. And I will never forget when she was 5 years old, she got into trouble. Not into trouble at school, but the teachers talked to me because one of her friends' fathers was a police officer. And she got into a big argument in the schoolyard about... Her friend had come in and said, prisons are really nice places. Prisoners get PlayStations to play with, and it's like being holiday. Yeah. And my Alex went, no, they're not. They're horrible. And this little girl went, my dad's a policeman. And Alex is like, well, my mum's a university professor. And basically, they had a big argument at 5 years old about prisons being horrible. And I think the thing that cheers me up slightly is assuming that the whole world doesn't blow up in the next 5 years. Young people are very switched on about some of these issues.
Are you taking solace in that now?
I think so, yeah. I kind of hope. I mean, it's like in the US, isn't it? Whenever I come over to the US, I meet so many really radical, committed people. The anti-imprisonment movement in the US is much stronger than it is over here. The abolitionist movement in the US is much stronger in many ways than over here. So it's almost as if everything's becoming polarized. So it's almost as if the people who are really, really punitive have got more punitive. And then the people who aren't, we keep on campaigning, we keep on getting on, we keep trying. Yeah, I think it's a difficult question to answer. I think it probably depends what mood you get me in, if that makes sense, as to whether I'm just absolutely despairing.
So you have this big profession, you have a family. Are there things that you do sort of intentionally to keep yourself running and going and okay and healthy?
That's a really good question. Yeah, that is a good question, actually. I should explain that just over a year ago, I've always had a history of eczema and skin issues, but I was first diagnosed with osteoarthritis in my knee about 10 years ago, my left knee. And it was painful, and I just kept thinking, I'll be fine. And then 2 years ago, now, 2016, I was getting more and more pain kind of in the top of my left leg. And I mean, your listeners might laugh because I didn't actually realise where my hip was. And I was away at a conference in Canada, and I kind of had time to think, and I thought, I've been walking around because I love seeing new places, and I was at this work conference, and I thought, that hurts. And I went on the internet and realised very quickly that the bit of me that was hurting was my left hip, and I thought, arthritis, because I knew I had it in my knee. And then, being me, I spent a couple of months being really busy at work and really busy with family and everything else, and ignoring it until I bumped into a friend of mine a few months later, and by that point I had a terrible limp, and he basically just looked at me and went, what have you done? You look like you've been run over by a truck. And I kind of went, oh. And my friend ordered me to go to the doctor. So anyway, I went to the doctor, who instantly x-rayed it, and within 8 days I was seeing a consultant, and 3 weeks after that I had my hip replaced. I had no cartilage in my hip at all. I had the hip of an 85-year-old. And I'd never had a night in hospital apart from giving birth to my daughter, so I was terrified. And I had a hip replacement. And that actually was awful because it meant I had to stop. I had to spend 3 months off work. And for 6 weeks of that, I was on 2 crutches. Then I was on, and I now have a stick, which I use when I need it. And I became legally disabled at that point, which mentally was quite a difficult thing for me to accept, I suppose. And then as soon as that pain was fixed, it became very clear that my knee had got worse. So I could feel the pain from that. So my lovely, lovely GP, my lovely doctor, said, well, we'll send you back to the same consultant. And he replaced my knee. So within the space of a year, in fact, in 6 months, it was 6 months a day, I had my knee and my hip done. So I have a brand new hip and a brand new knee. And in terms of looking after myself, that has been a massive wake-up call in actually making me take care of myself, because I've been very bad at, I suppose, insisting that I get to rest, insisting that I get to sit down. I mean, I'm like an over-enthusiastic puppy most of the time. Somebody suggests something like, "Oh, Helen, do you want to go to a prison?" I'm like, "Yeah." My boss said to me, 3 weeks before she was going to Uganda in Africa for a work event, she said to me, Helen, my previous boss, I was talking about Uganda. She said, well, I'm going to Uganda. Do you want to come with me? And I went, yeah. And that was three weeks away. So suddenly, there I was in Africa. And of course, being me, I added an extra day with my boss's permission. I went to a women's prison, being me. Because whenever I go away with work, for one thing, like a conference, I'll try and do other things. So I'll go to women's prisons or something, So
Oh my goodness.
So suddenly I've had to go, I can't do it. And in terms of looking after myself, that's actually been really hard, because now I've just been back in hospital in April just for an infection. And again, that was ridiculous. It was something that I fell over and grazed my knee, and then I got cellulitis, and I was in hospital. So in terms of looking after myself, I've always been very bad at it. And I do talk to my friends. I make sure I talk to my friends. I rest. I nap if I have to. I've been quite selfish about working at home when I can, rather than going into my office just because I think I should. I've become much more strict about saying no to things. It's very difficult for me because I want to please people, but I've become very forceful about saying no, I'm not doing that. And it's difficult. It's a battle in my head because I always feel like I should. And the other thing I've done recently, in February, is I have a puppy. And it sounds completely insane having a puppy when I've got so much going on, because I've got a husband who works full time. I have a 14-year-old daughter who's in a good school. She's got some issues of her own, but she's wonderful. I'm always busy. And so in a sense, we've got 2 cats as well. In a sense, having a puppy was a ridiculous thing to do. But I had a friend who rescued a Pomeranian puppy a year ago, and she's disabled. She's got arthritis the same as me. And I kind of fell in love with her puppy. And then I talked it over with my daughter, and we didn't, you're going to laugh, we didn't talk to my husband because we thought he'd be sensible and say we couldn't have a dog. So we didn't tell him. I think this is partly through being older as well. It's realising what my husband needs to know, what he doesn't. Bless him. So we kind of decided we wanted a Pomeranian puppy, and we went off and got a Pomeranian puppy and brought him home because we knew once my husband saw this puppy, he would just be in love with the puppy.
Oldest trick in the book.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I love my husband, bless him. My husband Nick is wonderful. We've been married 20 years this year. I've known him since I was at college, and he's wonderful. But we just kind of thought, he doesn't need to know. So we didn't tell him. And we brought this puppy home. And this puppy has been amazing. And it's made me realise as well, I'm nearly 50. I wanted a puppy. He's my puppy. And he gets me out of the house. I have to walk him. I am walking more because I've got him. It gives me an excuse to go out in woodland near here. We've been discovering, I've lived here for nearly 26 years, but I'm finding woodland around here I didn't know was here. And suddenly I'm going because I'm taking the dog. I'm meeting new people. And it's been wonderful, actually, and having that kind of time just to go, going out with my dog. And the other thing, this might make you laugh as well, is with things like meetings or things, I'm very aware now of, I could carry on doing this, which I'm not enjoying and it's not useful, or I could go home and be with my puppy.
Oh, absolutely.
So
you're preaching to the converted
Oh,
right
really?
here. My dog, my Jack Russell, is right behind me
nice.
right now.
Well, my Pomeranian's at doggy daycare today, and it's one reason I'm glad, because if not, he'd be barking now. He'd be jumping up and down and barking.
I saw the picture of your little puppy on Facebook.
Yeah.
Small baby.
No, he's lovely. He's funny. But in terms of looking after myself, I do that. I mean, there's been some major things I can't do anymore. Like, I used to lounge about in a hot bath with a book, but I have to have showers now because I can't physically get in and out of a bath, and that's affected me. But I've become much more... It's a learning curve with me because I'm quite bad at it, but I'm having to become much more selfish about saying what I can and cannot do. And it's not easy. I mean, and also I'm getting older as well, which is... Yeah, I'm 50 next year and I'm not like I was. But certainly it's been a very fast learning curve in terms of having to look after myself and also to prioritise medical appointments and prioritise things like that. Because the other thing is I've now got a lot of other arthritis. So I've got it in my neck, my back, my top of my spine. I've got it pretty much all down my spine. I've got it in my lower spine. I'm seeing physio for my lower spine. I have a lot of osteoarthritis. And so although I've had the surgery and it's wonderful to have that done, and I've still got some stiffness and everything, and obviously I'm recovering from the surgery, I'm still healing, I do have extensive osteoarthritis in other joints in my body. So it's not like I've had the hip done and I'm always going to be well. I have got this long-term condition. And my right knee, I know, is worsening gradually. I'm trying to ignore it. If you don't, trying not to make a fuss because I don't want to have any more time off work for a while, and but I can definitely feel it. And I do get incredibly tired, and I suspect I probably got tired before, but I'm having to actually be quite forceful now and say, no, I'm really tired, and I can't do that.
Does that become a sort of a change in your relationship then with your daughter as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible.
You have to say, there has to be something about, no, I can't take you to the shops or whatever.
She is fabulous, because last year, I mean, it can't have been easy for her. She was 13 years old and suddenly her mom, her mom had 2 major operations, and she was just amazing. And she is fabulous at telling me, Mummy, you look tired, sit down, or saying, Mummy, have you got your stick? And I know I keep telling her it's not her job to look after me, but actually she is absolutely awesome at just telling me, going, Mummy, your feet are swollen up, sit down. And we talk about it a lot because she is 14, she's 14 and a half, she's smart, she's clever, and she's come out, she's recently she's got some eating issues and anxiety issues, which she's very open about, which I like, because I've always kind of hidden things about mental health, where she's very open. And she's very open now. She's sort of negotiating things about sexuality and things as well. She's very open, which is just wonderful. So my daughter is actually wonderful. It's kind of other people that aren't so supportive. I do struggle with other people assuming that, because I've had my hip replaced and my knee replaced, I'm fine now. And I sometimes have to be I have to keep explaining. I mean, sometimes, I will make sure I have a stick, my walking stick with me. Okay, because I need it sometimes to lean on, but actually also as a signifier to other people that I'm not what I was. And also as a signifier to me that sometimes I have to slow up.
And just living with the reality that you might be disappointing people and they'll survive.
It's really hard. It's
Oh, I
really
think I
difficult.
think the listeners are going to I can just imagine there's a lot of people nodding their head because as women, even though we know we're smart and talented, we still get a lot of our identity from being pleasing,
Oh,
humans.
and the other thing is with me. I mean, I always worry about my house. Because my mom was a stay-at-home mom. Mostly, she worked part-time when I got older, but when I was small, she was a stay-at-home mom, and her house even now is immaculate. My mum's house is lovely. I've always worried about the state of my house being untidy, and over the last year, actually, I've had a lot of renovation work done in the house, which has been great. Um, but even now, I worry about the house being a mess or something not being done in the house. My daughter kind of says, "Well, mummy, it doesn't matter." But even now, I kind of think, "Oh, I can't do that," because I kind of feel like I should. It is the classic double burden of I do still work full time. I work full time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I didn't drop any hours down. I didn't go part time after my surgeries. I had time off, but I've gone back. I work full time. I sit on a I sit on a kind of. I'm appointed by the Minister of Justice to monitor the management of sex offenders, so I do that. Um, I do stuff with my daughter. I do spend quite a lot of time, and this might make your listeners laugh, by saying, "Mummy is not an octopus." Since Alex was little and my daughter was little, I've always said, that kind of mom thing when you feel like you should have 8 arms.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll have, "Mummy, can I have, Mummy, I need whatever," and with my husband as well, and I'll end up there going, "Mummy is not an octopus." And I say this all the time. It's a family joke. I've been saying it since my daughter was 1. Mummy is not an octopus.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I mean, today, before I talked to you, I had to juggle dropping the dog off at doggy daycare. My daughter had a nurse appointment, which then turned into I had an asthma assessment, which then turned into I had to go and get some new headphones because I'd left mine in my office. I then had to go off to a work meeting. I've come back. I'm now talking to you, and then I'm doing some work. Luckily, I'm working at home this afternoon now, and then I'm going to go and pick up my daughter, pick up doggy daycare, make
And
some food
get
for
some
supper.
and yeah, you have to get some
Yeah,
food on the
yeah,
table.
yeah. And I said to my husband, I mean, my husband, bless him, I love him, but he has days when he gets up, he has a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, whatever. He goes to work, he comes home. I have entire days based on get up, take dog out, have grocery delivery, go to work, talk to doctors about doctor's appointment, you know, do dog whatever, go to work, phone daughter school. One day my daughter's school phoned this week because she'd been sick at school, had to go and pick her up, bring her
Mm-hmm.
home, and so suddenly my average day is not like my husband's day would be get up, drink coffee, drive to work, do work, come home, eat
Mm-hmm.
supper, play computer games and watch TV. Which
It's more like whack-a-mole where
oh
you're
god,
trying to
absolutely, absolute
yeah.
whack-a-mole. When the moles pop up and you don't expect them. I mean, one day this week, what day was it? It was Tuesday, it must have been. Um, yeah, Tuesday. I was working at home and I have an article to finish, and I can work at home sometimes, which is lovely. And I was working at home and I was sitting quite happily, and I thought, okay, this dog was at daycare. Everything was quiet. I had a cup of coffee in my hand. I thought, right, I can finish writing this article, which I'm overdue for anyway. And then suddenly I get a call, and it's my daughter's school, and I think, oh, I know what's happened. And she's not been very well, and because she's in a lovely school, it's what you would call a public school. It's a state school. It's not a private school. Um, but it is 20 miles away because it's a good school. So I suddenly
Mm-hmm.
had to go and get her, which is a
Mm-hmm.
long way, and then come back. And then, of course, I was looking after her because she wasn't really well. And and yeah, it's multitasking to the extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes then, of course, I do kind of lose it completely and find myself yelling at everybody, which is not the best way to be. But I mean, I do read a lot of
Mm-hmm.
books, and the other thing I do a lot of at the moment, because it makes me sit down, is I do a lot of my family history on the internet, and I've been really
Oh,
enjoying
really?
doing that. And I started doing it on and off about, well, before my daughter was born, really, because I have an unusual surname. Cod is a very unusual surname, and my family are from South Wales. But I was interested, and my dad's dad died during the war. He was in the RAF during the war, and he was killed. So I went back looking, and it's a lot easier now. The internet is there. I'm on Ancestry and everything, and it's been wonderful finding amazing links. Like I have one branch of the family that went off to Pennsylvania in the mining because they were coal miners. So they went off to the
Of
Pennsylvania
course.
mines. And so I've got one branch of the family that went to the States and actually intermarried with German miners. So I've got one branch of family that went there. Some of your
Do you
listeners.
Does the name Lackawanna sound familiar?
Yes. I know.
Do you know, I know that you come to the States. They have a fantastic visitor center
Oh, okay.
that you actually go down in the mines
Oh, wow, okay.
in a trolley.
Okay.
And it's not for everyone.
No, I've been down
yeah.
coal mines here.
Oh, yeah. But they have a wonderful, I think it's actually a national park now.
Oh, okay.
But if that's where some of your people have gone, it might be fascinating for you to go there and visit the actual, mine.
Well, the other thing that's weird is my family are very traditionally Welsh chapel. Very much traditional kind of Welsh chapel. My mother was a Sunday school teacher, so was my grandmother. But one branch of the family became very famous in Mormonism, and a kind of second cousin of mine in the 1840s became one of the Welsh Mormons that helped set up Salt Lake City and was one of the Welsh Mormon pilgrims through a man called John Butler Ormond. And so we've got a branch of the family who actually, and funny enough, my dad's cousin has become a Mormon and didn't actually know that her distant relative was one of the pioneer Mormons. And for any of your listeners who are in Church of Latter-day Saints, they'll know about the Welsh Mormon pioneers, and some relatives of mine actually went over on the Hartley, which was one of the boats that went over, and eventually led to the founding of Salt Lake City. So that's another branch of the family. Now, my husband's side's even funnier, because he's related to both Scottish royalty and also to the judges in the Salem witch trials.
Oh my
goodness! Oh my goodness! When I found his side and I discovered he was related to one of the, I mean, as a good feminist, as a good feminist, I was like, you weren't related to the women, were you? No, you were related to one of the judges.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. So have you been to Salem, Massachusetts?
No, I haven't. I've been to Boston, but I've never been to Salem.
Your daughter would love that.
Absolutely. But of course, as a good feminist, with my kind of, my husband's related to actually the judges, not
right, I understand.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So, I've done that to calm myself down. Anyway, sorry.
I don't want to take any more of your time because I know how many hundreds of things you are involved in. And but what I hope that we can say hello in Toronto in August. I'll see you in August. Thank you so much.
All right, take care. Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us on Zestful Aging. I love to hear from my listeners, so send me an email at NicoleChristina.com and tell me what you'd like to hear more about. I would also greatly appreciate if you could hop on iTunes and rate the show. Ratings help other people find the podcast so I can share all these good, juicy interviews with others. I would also invite you to become a patron of the Zestful Aging podcast. Hop on over to patreon.com/Zestful Aging and consider making a small donation. You will be eligible for insider-only goodies and behind-the-scenes information, and it'll help you feel good knowing that you're contributing to the Zestful Aging podcast. I'll look forward to sharing more juicy interviews next week on Zestful Aging.